All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something I think we all experience, but maybe don't give a lot of thought to. That's shadows.
Yeah, shadow.
And we've got some great source material on this today.
Hmm.
Yeah. Ranging from like a playful kid's guide to shadows, all the way to like a college level science breakdown of how they work.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I think we're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to
Wow.
explore not just why shadows change shape and size,
Right.
but also uncover, I think, some surprising applications of these principles.
Yeah. It's funny how something so familiar, like a shadow,
Right.
can hide such fascinating science, right? I mean, most of us, we just kind of accept shadows as they are.
Yeah, yeah.
But when you start asking why, like, why does this happen? A whole world of light and angles and even the Earth's shape kind of opens up.
Yeah. It's true. It's true. It's like one of those things you just kind of take for granted until you really start to think about it.
Mm.
I remember as a kid being like amazed by how my shadow stretched out in the morning like a giant. And then by midday, it was like shrunk down. It was my first inkling that shadows weren't static. They were like constantly in motion.
Right, right. And that's that kid-friendly source you provided actually that nails it with that mini sun analogy.
Oh, yeah.
If you think of the sun as this giant flashlight, it kind of makes it easier to grasp how like distance
Right.
affects a shadow's size.
Oh, okay. So,
No.
so holding the flashlight close, big shadow,
Yeah,
moving it away, smaller shadow.
exactly.
Makes sense. Makes sense. But it's not just about size, right?
Yeah.
Because the kid's guide, I remember I had all these fun illustrations showing how just moving the light around
Mm.
also like distorts the shape of the shadow.
Right, right.
That always felt like magic to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not magic, but it is about this relationship between, the light source, the object, and then like the surface that shadow falls on. And as the
Right.
light source moves, the angles change. And that's where things get really interesting. And so that's where the college level source comes in, and it introduces us to this thing called the angle of incidence,
Okay.
which sounds very complicated, but it's really just describing the angle at which the light hits the object.
Okay. So break it down for me. Like imagine you have a flashlight beam shining straight onto a wall.
Yeah, yeah,
The shadow's pretty standard, right?
yeah,
But if you tilt that flashlight so the beam spreads out,
yeah,
the shadow stretches. So that's the angle of incidence at work.
precisely. And this ties directly into why shadows are longer at sunrise and sunset.
Oh, interesting.
Right, because the sun's low in the sky,
Yeah.
hitting us at a much shallower angle.
Yeah.
So our shadows stretch out dramatically.
So it's like the sun's playing a cosmic game of shadow puppets with us all day long.
Mm,
That's cool.
exactly.
But the college level source went even deeper, right?
Uh-huh.
They started talking about how like shadow intensity is also affected by distance.
Yep.
And they threw out this term, inverse square law, which honestly went a little over my head at first.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's okay.
I need you to break that down for me.
It's a concept that often trips people up. Think about it like this. Imagine you're standing near a streetlight, right? Seems super bright, right?
Yeah.
But as you walk further and further away,
Yeah.
that light appears dimmer, right?
Right, for sure.
That's because the light is essentially spreading out over a larger area, so it's less intense at any one point.
So the further you are from the light source, the more it's like diluted.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And now,
But how does that relate to shadows?
well, remember, a shadow is essentially the absence of light.
Right.
So a larger shadow being further from the light source
Okay.
is also a dimmer shadow
Makes sense.
because the light reaching that area is less intense.
Yeah.
It's like trying to read under a dim lamp versus a bright one,
Well, that's a good way to put it. Okay, so our shadows are not only stretching and shrinking throughout the day, but they're also getting dimmer and brighter depending on the sun's position.
Exactly.
That's so cool. It's like we've stumbled upon a whole hidden dimension to shadows.
Right. And this principle of the inverse square law, it's not just some abstract scientific concept. It has real-world applications. For example, photographers, they use this understanding
Oh, interesting.
to manipulate light and create dramatic shadows in their photos. They know that by changing the distance and angle of the light source, they can affect both the size and intensity of the shadows and add, depth and interest to their compositions.
So those stunning portraits with the sharp artistic shadows, that's all about understanding the inverse square law.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's all about light.
That's really cool. Okay, I'm starting to see shadows everywhere now.
Yeah.
Each one tells a story about the light that created it.
Exactly.
Oh, but wait, we can't forget about the other factors the college level source mentioned.
Right.
Um, the Earth's curvature and the shape of the object itself also play a role, right?
Absolutely. You know those long, dramatic shadows we see at sunrise and sunset?
Yeah.
Well, part of that's the angle of the light,
Uh-huh.
but the Earth's curvature is also at play. It's like the Earth itself is part of the shadow puppet show. It's bending the light, stretching out those shadows even further.
I never would have thought of it like that.
And, the shape of the object casting the shadow also matters.
Okay.
A tall, thin object will cast a completely different shadow than a short, wide one, even if they're the same distance from the light source.
Okay, so it's not just the light source, but the Earth's shape and the object's shape all creating this dance of shadows.
Right.
That's pretty amazing. But how exactly does the Earth's curvature affect those long shadows? And what's the science behind why different shapes cast different shadows? I need to know.
Those are great questions, and we're just getting started. Let's dive a little deeper into those fascinating aspects in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've talked about how shadows are more dynamic than they seem at first glance. But I'm still curious about that Earth's curvature thing you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
How does that play into those extra long shadows we see at sunrise and sunset? It seems like there's a whole geometry lesson hidden in there.
Yeah, you're right. There is. Think back to that flashlight analogy.
Okay.
If you shine a flashlight straight onto a wall, the shadow is pretty much the same size as the object, right?
Right.
But if you tilt the flashlight so the beam hits the wall at a really shallow angle,
Yeah.
the shadow stretches out way longer.
Okay, I can picture that.
Right.
So at sunrise and sunset, the sun's rays are hitting us at a much shallower angle because the Earth is curved. Is that what's going on?
Exactly. It's like the Earth is acting as this giant curved surface, similar to the wall in our flashlight example.
Okay.
When the sun is low on the horizon, its light has to travel further through the atmosphere and hit us at this more extreme angle. And that creates those elongated shadows that stretch out across the landscape.
Wow. So it's not just the angle of the sun, but the Earth's curvature that adds to those crazy long shadows.
That's right.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah. It's a beautiful example of how even something as simple as a shadow can reveal something really profound about our planet.
That's true.
In fact, ancient civilizations actually used this very principle to estimate the Earth's circumference.
Wait, really? They figured out the Earth was round by looking at shadows.
Yeah. There's this famous story about this Greek mathematician named Eratosthenes. He lived way back in the 3rd century BC.
Wow.
And he noticed that on the summer solstice, the sun shone directly down a well in the city of Syene, casting no shadow at all.
Interesting.
But at the same time in Alexandria, hundreds of miles north, a vertical stick cast a noticeable shadow.
So he realized that difference in shadow length must be because the Earth is curved.
Exactly. And by measuring the distance between the two cities and the angle of the shadow in Alexandria, he was able to calculate a remarkably accurate estimate of the Earth's circumference.
That is incredible. What a testament to the power of just observation.
Right.
And simple scientific reasoning. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, this makes me appreciate those long sunset shadows even more, knowing that they hold clues to the Earth's shape and size.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But we were also talking about how the shape of the object itself affects its shadow, right?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a little?
Of course. It all comes down to how light interacts with the surfaces of different shapes.
Okay.
A smooth, rounded object will scatter light differently than a jagged or angular object.
So a ball would cast a softer, more diffuse shadow than, say, a cube.
Exactly. And the more complex the shape of the object, the more intricate and interesting the shadow it casts. Think about a tree, for example. The way its branches and leaves intersect and overlap creates this whole complex pattern of light and shadow on the ground. It's like a natural work of art.
It is. It's a good point. I've never really thought about how the shape of a tree impacts the shadow.
Uh-huh.
But it makes perfect sense.
It does.
It's like each object has its own unique shadow signature based on its form and how it interacts with the light.
Right. And, this understanding of how shapes affect shadows has practical applications in fields like computer graphics.
Oh, interesting.
To create realistic 3D images and animations, computer programmers, they need to accurately simulate how light interacts with virtual objects to produce, convincing shadows.
Makes sense.
It's all about understanding those angles of incidence and how they vary across different surfaces.
Okay, so whether it's a tree, a building, or a computer-generated image, understanding the relationship between shape and shadow is essential for creating a realistic and visually appealing representation of that thing. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But speaking of different light sources, the college-level source also touched on the idea that the sun isn't the only thing that casts shadows.
Right.
What about artificial light? Does everything we've talked about still apply?
That's a great question, and it opens up a whole new dimension to our exploration of shadows.
Oh, I like where this is going.
While the fundamental principles remain the same,
Okay.
artificial light sources introduce some fascinating twists and turns.
Okay, I am very intrigued. Tell me more. So we've covered how the sun, as like our, I guess, main light source,
Right.
creates these dynamic shadows that change with the time of day, the Earth's curvature,
Yeah.
even the shapes of objects.
Right, right.
But you're saying artificial light adds another layer on top of all of this.
Absolutely. Think about all the different kinds of artificial light that we encounter every day.
Yeah.
Street lights, lamps in our homes, even the flash on our phone.
Right.
Each of these sources, they emit light differently than the sun, and that affects the shadows they cast.
Okay, so let's start simple. Like a lamp in a room.
Uh-huh.
How would the shadow from that lamp differ from a shadow created by the sun?
Well, first off, the intensity of the light source matters.
Okay.
A lamp is much weaker than the sun.
Right.
So the shadows it casts will generally be less sharp and defined. They might have softer edges and appear kind of blurry,
That makes sense. Dimmer light, less distinct shadow.
Right.
But what about the color of the light? Does that play a role at all?
Absolutely. We tend to think of shadows as just like dark areas, right?
Yeah.
But they can actually take on these subtle hues depending on the light source. Sunlight at midday appears almost white.
Right.
So the shadows it creates are fairly neutral in color, but a lamp, with a warm yellowish bulb, will actually cast shadows with a slightly bluish tint.
Oh, really? That's cool. So the color of the shadow is like the opposite of the color of the light source.
Yes.
It's like a hidden color wheel within the shadows.
Precisely. It's a phenomenon known as complementary colors. And you can really see this in action with colored stage lighting.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine a red spotlight shining on a performer.
Uh-huh.
The shadow it casts will have a greenish hue.
That is so cool.
Ah.
All right, so next time I'm at a concert or a play, I'm going to be checking out the shadows.
Right.
See how those stage lights are creating those color pops I never even would have thought of before.
Exactly. It's like a hidden visual language that adds depth and richness to the performance.
But artificial light can also create interesting effects beyond color, right?
Right.
Think about streetlights at night. They often cast multiple shadows of the same object because the light's coming from different directions.
Exactly.
I've definitely seen that. It's like you get this layered shadow effect. What causes that?
Well, it's because, those streetlights, they have multiple bulbs, each casting their own light and creating their own distinct shadow. And since those bulbs are positioned at different angles, the shadows they create kind of overlap and intersect, resulting in that layered effect you described.
So it's like each bulb is having its own little shadow puppet show.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the combination of all of them.
Exactly.
It's really amazing. It just makes me think about how much we take shadows for granted. You know?
Right.
They're not just these static, lifeless shapes,
Right.
but they're these dynamic reflections of the light.
Uh-huh.
The color, even the position of the light source. It's wild.
It's a reminder that even the most commonplace phenomena can be filled with wonder and complexity if we just take the time to observe them,
Yeah.
And who knows what other shadow secrets are waiting to be discovered. Maybe you'll be the one to make the next big breakthrough in shadow science.
Well, after this deep dive, I'm definitely looking at shadows with a whole new perspective. It's not just dark patches anymore,
Yeah.
but they're like these dynamic expressions of light and color and even the shape of our planet. It's pretty awesome.
And that's the beauty of exploration and curiosity, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
It allows us to see the familiar in a new light, revealing hidden depths and connections we never knew existed.
Well, on that note, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of shadows. Until next time, stay curious and never stop exploring the wonders of the world.